Okay, thank you.
Okay, there we are. Yeah, you can see my screen now, everyone?
Yes, I'm seeing.
Yep, we can.
Thank you. And so here we have the slideshow. Tatiana, you just need to indicate to me one way or another when you would like to have the next slide. Yeah? Over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Andreas. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. It's a big pleasure to talk to you today, to be virtually at the Center for the Study of Social and Global Justice and at the National University. So I will divide my presentation into two parts. In the first one, I will talk about my theoretical approach and how I use Nikos Poulantzas' framework to analyze regionalism in capitalism. After that, I will make a brief analysis about Latin American recent experience, focusing on Mercosur analysis. Go forward, please, Andreas. Starting from Poulantzas' political theory in capitalism, it's important to highlight three concepts: the idea of juridical political structure, the relative autonomy and bureaucratism, and the power block. And after that, the analysis about the current imperialist phase after the Second War that he made in the book called Social Class in Contemporary Capitalism. Poulantzas' capitalist states theory is based on the idea of the juridical political structure that built by the formally equalitarian law and the universal institutions that shape the double effect of the capitalist state, the representation and unification of the people and the social class isolation. The state has the role of maintaining social and territorial cohesion. The nationalism form is an ideology in the unit of the uneven development, where the specific determinants of each social formation take place. The relative autonomy is linked to the role of the bureaucracy and the balance of commitment between social class. Power block is linked to the idea of the class and fractions division that are unified for one of them. That's the use of the Gramsci hegemony concept. The hegemony fraction has the political state control for Poulantzas. It means that the bourgeoisie is not homogeneous and that hegemony fraction depends on the state's politics in a specific political conjuncture. The class and fractions are determined by the economy, ideology, and political effects. For Poulantzas, imperialism is a chain that includes imperialist states and dependent states. After the Second War, under the US demand, the European states were at the same time dependent on US and imperialist for Africa, Asia, and Latin American states. The international division of labor is not more determined into industrial and agrarian economies. The internationalization of production made the imperialist social reproduction relations being internalized into dependent social formations. It means a new form of dependence. So the national states still play their own role for the maintenance of capitalist mode of production. It was not an obsolete structure, as many intellectuals defended. What has been changed was the creation of a new fraction, the internal bourgeoisie. So the states organize the foreign capital inside social formation. Go forward, please, Andreas. Yes. The internal bourgeoisie occupies an intermediary position, as you can see in this table, between the associated bourgeoisie and the national bourgeoisie, because it depends on the foreign capital, but it competes with them too, with it too. So that's the difference when you have national bourgeoisie that could be an anti-imperialist position because it depends on the national market. And you can have the comprador or associated bourgeoisie, as Latin American studies pointed, when you have just an association, a dependent relation. You don't have conflicts. When you have internal bourgeoisie, you have selected conflicts between foreign capital and national capital. And also the foreign policy will reflect it on that. That's the use of Pilantz's concept. Here at the Unicamp University, we have a school, a Pilantzian school for Brazilian politics. When you use the concept of internal bourgeoisie to analyze the Brazilian current politics and historical politics. That means that we do not agree from the idea for the 30 international communists that in Brazil could be a national bourgeoisie that will be running for a big transformation or for a revolution strategy. So in the debate about the regionalism, in the debate between Pilantzas and Mandel in the 70s, when they analyzed the European economic cooperation, they had divergence about the role of the monopolist capital and international institutions, especially the regional one. Both denied the Kautskian perspective about ultra-imperialism, as Magdoff, writers, or others, and they support the Lenin's approach, sustaining the existence of imperialist conflicts. But Polantza defended that it was not a supranational process because the national states remain their specific role. And Mandel believed that it had been created an European capital amalgamation and an European state could be created being a rival of the US imperialism. But Polantza defended that the struggle was still for the national state and the US anti-imperialism. In this sense, I sustain that the regionalism is a transitory political process between governments, that it is determined by class and fractions interests, especially by the hegemony fraction inside the key states in the region. Go forward, please, Andreas. So it can be said that it's a contradictory unit among power blocks, and each hegemony fraction will shape the regionalism model will be adopted by the state. Go forward, the next table you can have, yes. So here I organize the idea of class fraction and the model of regionalism we can have in the recent experience of Latin America. Please, if you have any doubt, you can interrupt me. No. Okay. there are three models: the open regionalism, the multidimensional regionalism, and the anti-imperialist regionalism. It is linked to the hegemony of the associated bourgeoisie, internal bourgeoisie, or national bourgeoisie. And the role of the popular classes in foreign policy will depend on the organization and mobilization of that sector. The popular class, as in national politics, will not have hegemony, except if we are in a transitional moment. But they can be allied class, supported in an alliance with the national bourgeoisie, in an anti-imperialist foreign policy or regionalism, or they can be part of a front with the internal bourgeoisie. The idea of front is to differ from an alliance. It's to say that it's more flexible, that it doesn't goes for a commitment. You don't have an agreement. You can have just in a conjuncture. That's why it will be present in Brazilian politics and the progressive governments as Lula or as Getúlio Vargas and others was very unstable. And in these moments, when you have the front within the popular classes and the internal bourgeoisie, you can have a foreign policy which the political position will be a conflictive subordination, because it's not an anti-imperialist position, but you have to conquer for more space, for more force in the terms of the relations between the dependent states and the imperialism. So the regionalism will be a multidimensional, that it means you can have social and political arrangements, or they can be the opposition force. The popular class can occupy this position that will be against the imperialism and the associated bourgeoisie alliance, when you have a passive subordinated foreign policy, and the open regionalism model. Oh, well, next, please, Andreas. My analysis about Mercosur is based on a division of the bloc history into 5 periods, as you can see. It's linked to the Brazilian bourgeoisie interests, as it's the key state in this process. The first period concerns with the initial process between 1991 and 1994, when the free trade area was created, influenced by the idea of open regionalism, which concerns the neoliberalism program. The second one was between 1995 and 1998, when the custom union was created and there was a big increase of internal commerce. The third period, between 1999 and 2002, was a period of the neoliberalism crisis in the region, when the bloc also entered into crisis, and the free trade agreement of Americas was in negotiation. It was a crucial moment for the bloc, and the Brazilian bourgeoisie realizes how important it was for its exportation and the bargaining power into the international arena. The 40 period was between 2003 and 2012. It was called the pink tide moment in Latin America. there was a relaunch of the bloc with Lula's, Kirchner, and other governments elected. In parliament, they found investments and social councils were created, shaping the multidimensional agenda that was unstable. And the last one, which started in 2012, with the second crisis of the bloc, with the return of the open regionalism model. It took place after the Paraguay coup d'etat and Venezuela entrance into Mercosur, and was concluded with 2016 Brazilian coup d'etat. It was seen with the celebration of the Mercosur EU treaty, the reduction of the custom unit tariff, the abandon of social and political commitments. This brief history shows a pendular movement of the regionalism that depends on power block arrangement. And so what we could say about a brief debate for what did the popular class and popular movements could build in the pink tide moment, what we could be in the next steps in the next another conjuncture. So the next one, please, Andreas. What we could call about an anti-neoliberal program. Well, I think that the first thing is that to think regionalism in a dependence area, especially when we are so close to US, we need to think about to build a process that will not have the hegemony of the foreign capital, because many processes include the Mercosur could have the multinational enterprises having the hegemony of this process, like when you have the open regionalism and just a liberalization and not a development process. We need to build an anti-imperialism program that helps the region to go forward with the dependence. The anti-neoliberal program could be summarized with some goals, a positive agenda that I'm calling here. That it could be a regional production integration, but we need a program of financialization of that, like the South Bank, a developmentalist program that include infrastructure and communication, social issues like programs, not just about the work, but about against poverty, and that could respect the indigenous peoples and the environmental. When you talk about developmentalist program, we need to focus on this new concept of developmentalism. The people solidarity, that I think it was an important question for the ALBA's initiative. When you have the popular movements articulations, we can say that it can build just an anti-imperialism solidarity, or we can really think about the people's integration. That's a big challenge, to think what can build just not a negative agenda, but what can be built as a positive agenda that will not depend on governments elected, that will supply the necessities and all the not the unions and the popular movements could be in this process. The anti-imperialist struggle that goes against the military bases, against Colombia plan and all of that, but also against the model of dependence with the financial capital. I think one point when we are talking about South America Union sovereign and development is that we need to focus that this anti-imperialism struggle is not just for sovereign, but it's still for the challenge to have their own autonomy for political economy decisions. The point is not a formal sovereign, but to go and to stop all this kind of dependence. So it really now depends on Brazil election next year, and the opposition allowed the Lula to be the president. It's not an easy moment for us, and I think the Brazilian bourgeoisie that had built an alliance against the PT's government in 2016 with the imperialist and associated bourgeoisie and the high middle class for the coup d'etat. They have an oscillated position now that we can go through it, like they are not support the end of the Mercosur. So we have something that calls about not to be a Bolivarian bloc, an anti-imperialist bloc, but they still want the Mercosur to remain. So it can be in the agenda. But I think the next program of PT's government seems to be an anti-neoliberal program, because we are fighting against a neo-fascist government. So that's what popular movements and trade unions can have in this agenda, to put this government more for the left, if we can get there. So that's the brief what I want to share with you. I want to listen you. Maybe you have read my test, Latin American perspective, and we can talk more. I am really working with this instrumental framework, and I supervise theses and masters that are looking for the bourgeoisie and the high middle class interest in foreign policy. So I think we can talk more when you have questions. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much, Tatiana. Fascinating, yeah, bringing us right up to this moment in time, also in relation to the current struggles in Brazil itself. And you mentioned already next year's elections and the kind of tensions around that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, if that's okay. Yeah.
Yes.
So we can again see each other, and please feel free to switch on your cameras. Yeah, it gives us a better kind of impression, almost as if we were meeting in a room, the more faces we can see. So no pressure, but if you do switch on, that's much appreciated. So fascinating presentation. Thanks a lot, Tatiana. I would be happy now to take first questions or comments. Who would like to start us off, please? Yes, Catherine, you've got your hand up.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Really good presentation. I have two questions. The first one is your table 3, where you talk about the bourgeoisie. I was wondering if you could do the same thing with the working class and give a voice to the working class and see, well, did they have any say at any stage of well, all those different stages? And the second question is, what would this new developmentist policy look like?
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. I think, Tatiana, I hand that over straight to you.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. So, Catherine, about working class and foreign policy, in the relation different bourgeoisie fractions. It's common to say that when you have a national bourgeoisie, it will be in alliance with a working class for the anti-imperialist fight. It doesn't happen now in South America with Venezuela and Bolivia cases. No, when I mean national bourgeoisie, in this case we have a state national bourgeoisie. It's based on Bethlehem thought about Soviet Union and China. When we are thinking about a transition process that could be a bureaucratization way, or it could be go forward on this transition, that's a point. So how we can have it and build this process. In Brazil, we didn't have a national bourgeoisie when we have the development process during 30s and 80 years. As party of the Communist Party expected that, defended that. Why that? Why not? I think it was because how the development of the industries came through Brazil. We had it with the control of the multinational capitalism, or the US companies that came through to the region. So that's why we could think about this alliance or this process together, and we could build a national bourgeoisie. They were not interested in this rupture, in an anti-imperialist process. That's why every time we have like the Venezuela entrance and so on, we had a shock or unstable government. The second point is to have an opposition. When you have nowadays, like nowadays, the regional, open regionalism and the subordinate. In Bolsonaro, I'm calling that we have explicit passive subordination to US, to the imperialism. The anti-globalism discourse or alliance between Trump and Bolsonaro was explicit Bolsonaro. So the working class is in opposition. So how did it build effective politics effects on states' politics? It doesn't have, because we are into neo-fascist program, it's not a dictatorship yet, but we do have a neo-fascist movement and also government that could be build a dictatorship or not. We are in this fight, so we can be against Mercosur EU treatment. But how did the trade unions will be influenced in this government? This doesn't have, so it's opposition position. And when you have the front, the neo-developmentalist front, your second question, I can't share. We had the free trade agreement of America's negotiation, and the trade unions and popular movements fight against it. We made a campaign, a popular campaign against the free trade agreement. And we defended the relaunch of the Mercosur. So the internal bourgeoisie was too interested in the denial of the free trade agreement of America. And also the popular movements, but they doesn't went into a table and made a pact. Oh, let's elect Lula, then we will have neo-developmentalism. Actually, the internal bourgeoisie were interested in a moderated neoliberalism that could negotiate the open market and to have a selective protectionism. The neo, for me, is a reform for neoliberalism. And it means difference between neo, the old developmentalism in this moment, that it means it is not just for industrial sector. It means we have the big companies for infrastructure. We have agribusiness also being beneficiary for this program. But we do have the popular movements and working class being appended for these policies, as for the increase of the minimum wage. You know, so you have a front, a neo-developmentalist front. When we join the interest, the state could join the interest of the internal bourgeoisie and the popular, the working class, the popular movements and trade unions and so on. But as it is not a pact, it will be more unstable. That's why when the international financial crisis came through Brazil and the distribution issue came and all this offensive of imperialism against the pink tide movements made it broke. Then the internal bourgeoisie made an alliance with other sectors. So I think it's a form, the neo-developmentalism is a form of intervention state in peripheral social formation during the neoliberalism. So it's not strong as the old one, but it was very important for that moment, for the regionalism, for Venezuela to be the revolution, to maintain the revolution and so on. So I don't know if I reply everything, so thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Who is next? Yes, Oliver, please, and then Junyi.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. I found your talk really interesting. I'd just like you to talk a bit more about Venezuela. You've mentioned the national bourgeoisie, but just talking about, I mean, you seem to be, you see it as a failure, or, you know, many problems, etc. I'm just want you to elaborate on a more deeper analysis of things that have been happening, for example, the dependence on petroleum, etc. And yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not an expertise in Venezuela, but I know something. Let's try to say. In this with this instrumental approach, using a Pulantzas framework, I think it's one important issue. The South American experience in transitions had always some important variants, like how it will be the army force. It was the allenge problem, Pulantzas told about it. Don't go forward because you don't have army with you. That was the big difference. Chavez came through the military force and from the army, and he could build a popular army, and also the misiones, and that was the social programs and the way to organize people. I think that's the difference between neo-developmentalist and the Bolivarian experience. How you could organize or disorganize people. So in Brazil, we could open space to fascist forces. As Venezuela, they could build a big popular movement that can support this process. So during the 20th century, there were very different kinds of experiences in South America. In Venezuela, Bolivia, Peru, and others could get to this step for industrialization. They became dependent on just the minerals or oil and agricultural products. Argentina, Mexico, Brazil could have this difference. So we need to think about these different steps of development. Venezuela still is dependent on oil and to sell the oil for US. I think that maybe it's your question, huh? They can manage it. So the point of the Chavez project, I think, is to control this, the oil, to have a national and the state enterprise, and also to make political and social missions, and to share the rates and the wealth for the oil. It doesn't matter if they need to sell for US or not. They can decide to sell for China or for Russia and so on. So it's easy for both. That's why I think they had a mistake, because they doesn't have an industrial project as the big strategy for this transition. Now they live in a big economic crisis with stagnation and high prices, because the bourgeoisie is still not the national, not the state bourgeoisie, but the local bourgeoisie is still associated or comprador bourgeoisie. So they just import industrial and export some products. So what they do when they want to take off the president, or they want to act into this crisis, they block the importation, and they do a strike of providing people to get food, to get clothes. They try to manage the people to be against the government with this. That's a point. So Chavez has these limits with no industrial policy, with the dependence on US to buy the oil. But it's true that they are into a war. Now with Bolsonaro, it's an alliance against Venezuela. They made many initiatives that caused the Lima's group or Pro-Sul groups. All of them was, let's join the states that go support the US intervention in the region. And so I think that the left can and need to see the limits of this, the Chavist strategy, as I mean in regionalism way, like what was ALBA, what they could do or not, and so on. But we need to think that imperialism plays an important role for this. And they make like an interruptive territorial to build it like oh, Venezuela, you doesn't have exit permitted, allow it US to command it, you know? And they are resisting. They are a very good people with residence power in this. And sure, now they need Russia's support and China's support. So it's a war. It's a war. And Brazilian is also receiving migrants and intervening in some kinds of this. So in terms of analysis, I think you have a national bourgeoisie, and you have this the party as a government. So they do have problems with corruption and bureaucratization. Yes, it will run for the end of this process, or it will go forward. Nobody knows. That's class struggle, you know. It depends on Brazilian elections next year.
Thank you. So class struggle is always open-ended. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yi, you are next, and then Sinem.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry. I just look at you, not to look at the screen. Thank you for a very interesting presentation, Tatiana. I have two questions. The first one is a bit broad, which is we often say to the students that neoliberalism works the same. There's no face on neoliberalism because it works like globally principle. But I wonder, in your observation of Latin America's resistance to neoliberalism, would it be possible if you would be able to generate any characteristics from your observation, the resistance to neoliberalism? What is particularly we would be able to say this is the type of your resistance to neoliberalism? The second question is about Mercosur. To my understanding, at the national level, Brazil and Argentina, they don't get along together in Mercosur. As you know, as you would definitely be very familiar with, I'm an outsider to observe that the countries have a different interest. My question would be possible for you to see that, or actually they already exist, the not Mercosur, but Pan-Latin Americans Workers Alliance, as in my case of the Asia, we look into whether it's possible for workers in Japan, in China, in Taiwan to work together against the exploitation. Is there the situation similar happened in Latin America in different countries? So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. For the first one, I do think that if these national states are important, it's because neoliberalism is an international order, but it is not a reality in China. And we do have difference in each country by the dynamics and also the way that they adopted neoliberalism programs or not. And at the 19th, it was useful to say that we had a Brazilian neoliberalism instead of the Argentine neoliberalism. No, it means the way that the privatization programs, the liberalization and so on had been adopted or not. And also the residents. We do had at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 2000s, residents, popular residents that we could call the anti-globalism movements as World Social Forum and so on. But each state could nationalize this process. It could be a strong movement against it or not. It depends on all configurations and all mobilizations. And as you told about Brazil and Argentina, Argentina has a trade union structure in history very different from Brazil. And now they can resist more. And they have also now a resistance for the internal bourgeoisie also, with the Mercosur treaty or Korean treaty and so on. And they are saying, no, we don't want to be in the same way as Brazil policy. So it's you are right. It's a very special moment because in 3 decades, it's the first time that Brazil and Argentina are not in the same way. So in Argentina, they have the enforcement of internal bourgeoisie, and in Brazil, we don't. We have the foreign capital being the hegemon. That's the dependence. Foreign capital could be hegemony in one power block. That's important to remark. But that you ask, we still have neoliberalism resistance, as we could see with the Bolivian process, that they had a coup d'etat, military coup d'etat, like the old way, and they could be elected, allied government in few years, but they are fighting against imperialism and they are fighting against the opposition and so on. I think Brazil is in the bad situation from the residents. It has many factors. If you were interested, I can develop this more. But as in terms of Mercosur, do we have workers' alliance or works networks? Yes, we have. But you know, this I have a critical point of view for what Mercosur built as social council, or social participation, because it's the same when we call about social participation, national policies, like, oh, let's build a Congress, a national Congress for education or so on. It's not to get power to working class. That's the point when we think and we know about state theory, you know. But we do have some networks that goes inside the multinationals for the automobilistic sector, that it is because in Germany, they built it and it spread for South America, and they had a working groups that has this participation in this social council for Mercosur. The social council depends on the government with the presidents of the Mercosur that change each semester, and is responsible to the invitation of whom popular movement will be invited or not to be in this conference. And also, I have been there. And then you made a letter or a document, final document that, we deny the Mercosur treat because we don't know what is there. People in Latin America doesn't know anything about Mercosur treatment. It's silence. It's no. So we deny it. What do this reflected on presidents' meetings? Nothing. Just go forward. So I think it's a big challenge when you talk about an anti-neoliberal agenda. What could be the place for the working class? That it is not be just the residents. We have a free trade agreement, let's fight against. Okay, but when we have pink tide period, what could we build that will be maintained, that will be here with us today? That's a challenge. I pointed in some articles that for me, the left in Brazil divided against after the free trade agreement fight. And like the trade unions had a developmentalist agenda, and the popular movements like landless movement, the World March of Women, and so on, start just to build this solidarity movement. And 10 years after the free trade agreement being negotiated, being archived, they made a meeting in Cuba and we have difference, we can go together. Okay, come on, why? Why not? You can't support developmentalists. Developmentalists will generate jobs. We need jobs. You don't need just solidarity. You can't build much with just solidarity movement. No. So I think it's an important balance. We need to do, and we need to think what is to build a regional process, a people regional process. I don't know for European, what do you think about it? But maybe it's important.
Thank you, Tatiana. Sinen.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Hi, Andreas. Hi, Tatiana. Indeed, you partially give answer to my question, but again, I want to ask some, maybe you can specify some details that in EU, for instance, in EU and other relations, that EU conditions some human rights, democracy promotion, rule of law, and some social rights, and in its relations with the third countries. And recently, as you also mentioned, there is a relation with EU and Mercosur trade. And as far as I know, that France gave a kind of remark that it will not ratify because of the environmental protection. I'm not quite sure, but I remember something like that. Maybe Catherine also wrote something about environmental dimension of the deal. But I'm going to ask something other, that do you have any, just maybe you can give some details about the EU-Mercosur trade deal and its social rights dimension, whether the EU conditions some social rights during the deal, and as well as about gender equality. and women participation, female participation in labor market, and gender equality in labor markets. What are these kind of conditions? Do you have any knowledge about this? I wonder. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good question. Let's see. So, what do we know about Mercosur? No, it was 20 years of negotiation, and we know when we are talking about free trade agreement, it doesn't mean free trade agreement. It means investment, promotion, and protection. First thing. Other things for us, government acquisitions that we can more have a specific protectionism, privatization, and we need to adapt the environmental laws and social laws, all of that. So when it began, it was in the same moment at free trade agreement of America has been negotiated. So we can see an imperialist concurrence in that. That's important to remark. I think this moment that they made a big negotiation in 2019. The China position in the world had an important role for that, Catherine said something, or I don't know, about the China role in regionalism. I think it's important to say that after 2012, we can see the increase of China exportation and China's investment, foreign direct investment in infrastructure, in energy, and so on. So to say something about Mercosur, when we talk about social rights dimensions and so on, and gender inequality. So what do Latin Mercosur countries have to export? What the bourgeoisie are interested in this? They are interested in the agricultural exportation. So when you do this, we change all the system of production in Brazil, and it affects all human lives, because it will increase the price, the food price, and the human needs to resolve this. We have also to compete with the European products. We need to lower the wage and the rights, the workers' rights. So for that, to get that in 2019, the government decided reform, workers' reform, with allowing the tercerization of all the jobs. We had a law that protects the man job for that enterprise not to be for a 30 enterprise, that we need to have the contract, the formal contract with that enterprise, and also the pension, the reform, just to adjust. The bourgeoisie said, oh, we need to compete. Why don't we compete with European products? It's because we have a high cost with wages and rights. Let's get this down. So they doesn't think about that needs. They doesn't think that they do not have conditions to compete. They doesn't have technology and finance and so on. The problem is the workers. So you go through the workers, it's against the workers and the rights. And the feminist movement, especially the World March of Women, that's the most important movement here in Brazil, that has this international articulation. You do have this in Europe. They have this study that said about not just the impact on agriculture, but in all humans' lives when you have the difference in social rights and democracy and so on in humans' lives. So it's when you call about neoliberalism program of regional integration, like Mercosur, you will be, if it is affected or not, that you answer me about, asking me about France's position in German and so on. I think that's a good thing for us, that France has the support for the special political agriculture political, so they are not interested in this. And also the German, the green parties and so on are not interested into the environmental process in Brazil and so on. So I think it's very difficult to be to have the ratification of this treatment. That could be a hope for Latin America if Europe decides to deny, doesn't accept this. That was a historical shock, you know, because we wanted the Brazilian bourgeoisie wants European market in what you doesn't want to open because it's a secured food, you know, it's a sovereign issue for you. So it's a contradictory, a good thing, because we doesn't see any advantage in accepting that. I mean the left and trade unions and so on, no, not all Brazilian people and bourgeoisie. I don't know if I answer everything told me.
Thank you, Tatiana. And I shall abuse my position as chair at this point and also raise a couple of questions, if I may, please. So I very much like the way how you look at different class fractions and how they are aligned with foreign capital. At the global context, but especially also in the European context, a lot of observers would talk about transnational capital. So it's not just the US capital, which comes as a kind of foreign capital into a country, but there's actually also a transnational capitalist class fractions, which operates across different countries at the same time. Big corporations, I don't know, like Mercedes-Benz, Siemens. In a way, they are still German, but they're also more than just a German corporation. Apple, yeah. How do we treat such? Is that a US transnational corporation, or is it not really transnational capital? Microsoft, Apple, IBM. And so my question to you, what's the situation in Latin America? Would it not also make sense to talk about it? Is there not Odebrecht, for example? Is there a Brazilian company, Petrobras, or don't they also have locations in neighboring countries? Perhaps some corporations which straddle Brazil and Argentina at the same time. Yeah, so is there no role for transnational capital in your analysis? That's the first question, a conceptual question. And the second question is, you put great hope on next year's election, and rightly so, because at this point in time, the situation is pretty dire. You talk about a fascist regime under Bolsonaro. What could one hope for realistically if Lula did return to power? Has he not already achieved the maximum possible with this kind of class compromise strategy, cooperating with the domestic bourgeoisie? What would give you hope that it is possible actually to go beyond that? Or is that actually the maximum, what already was experienced in the past? Over to you. So you've muted yourself by accident.
Sorry, sorry about that. Oh, thank you so much. For the transnational capitalist thesis, I do not agree with that, as you. It doesn't mean about the financialization capital, but I think that include for that, when you open like Brazilian currency balance, we can say that for the financialization capital, it means the fund, security, and debt titles, and so on. It is 80% American capital. If we look for Citibank and two enterprise, Citibank and other one I forgot now. But if we look for industrial investment, we have more diversity in the European enterprises have more than 60% with German, France, and UK enterprise. So we have this difference. I can't conclude that we have a transnational capital. We still have national capital that can act around the world. And it was for Polanyi and for Marx, the idea that capital will be internationalized, that we cannot, the political structure is a nationalism, but you can think about to analyze just a national social formation. We are always looking how is the foreign capital, how is the exportation and all the movements of capital. But the states will organize it. And also the bourgeoisie will always have a place when they have your base and your rates go there and the wealth will be there. It can be distributed for the world during a period, but in this case, like William Robinson, Carroll, and so on, they said about the end of the fractions, of the class fractions also, because you have this new fraction that's a financial capital. It doesn't mean that you have groups that when activity is more important than other. The fact that all companies have founders and put their money into financial capital doesn't mean that all the capitalism is financial capital. I think it's important to highlight. So I know the thesis like Kees van der Pijl that sustain the transatlantic capitalism and so on, like an amalgamation. You can have one or other companies that make this fusion, but it doesn't mean that capitalism has a political structure and also an economy that works in this sense. And Latin America is the same. After 2008 crisis, Brazil bought many Argentine enterprises. So we had a process of fusion, but it's not transnational. It's like that enterprise, that company, stopped being an Argentine company. It became to be a Brazilian company. That was the difference. For Odebrecht, Petrobras, they are completely national enterprises. Odebrecht and Petrobras many times have association. They create a holding to operate in some country to build a bridge or to have a plant for Petrobras. But it's like they have the majority in this process. when we are talking about regions and so on. So I think that all our empirical, when I'm saying about our empirical, the group where I made my PhD, we still work together. It's more than 40 PhD candidates and masters with my supervisor and me, and we do much empirical research. We do believe in empirical research. That's my point with this bibliography about transnational capital. First, they work with the elite concept. And like the people who works like a CEO in one enterprise could be president of a national bank. So they have this network. That's why they form, they are of the same class. It's not class. It's not Marxist perspective, it's networking, it's wherever you want, but it's not property and surplus value process and so on. And they do not do many empirical research. No, just say, oh, the people that goes to OCDE forum and to WTO are the same. Okay, but it doesn't mean power, So that's my point with this. And to Lula in 2002 in Brazil, I think it's still early to say, to have a good analysis from that. But in this moment, what can we say? It will not be easy. For me, I still have doubt if they will allow Lula to be a candidate. We are in a coup. To have a coup inside a coup, it's easy. They broke all the institutions and they doesn't have matter with this. So it's the first thing. The second, that if they allowed Lula, you need to build a very good consensual program. That it will be weakening if we compare with the first government. But for us, it's important. I am talking about a front against neofascism. It's like a Gramscian pointed in Italian. Doesn't matter if it will be Lula, Ciro, or who wants to be against Bolsonaro. You just need to, but in terms of neo-developmentalists and so on, it will be very, very weak. And they can reply something like, and we still have to fight against all what has been broken this year, like Odebrecht, you mentioned. The car wash operation that was the anti-corruption and what put Lula's in jail, put many of these enterprisers into the jail. And they were in a very difficult situation. So they need to rebuild the Brazilian capitalism, So the forces are very different. It's not because they doesn't want to, it's because it will be very, very hard to have a progressive agenda and so on. And the people are not organized in it. I think that's the most difficult issue in Brazil. The trade unions are very, very, not in a passive situation, but in a difficult situation to organize people. And we do not have like a neoliberalism ideology could got inside the people, and it's not easy to organize.
Okay. Thank you, Tatiana. So I've got two colleagues who have their hands raised, and I think we take those two questions as the last two questions. Is there anybody else who, in addition to Elif and Oliver, wants to ask something? Okay, no, so Elif, if you go first, directly followed by Oliver, and then Tatiana, you have the final word. Elif, over to you.
Thank you, good evening. I was wondering whether, many thanks for your presentation. It's interesting to hear some empirical data as well for me. Can you further elaborate on the position of bourgeoisie, if you like, different fractions like internal and international, regarding the recent changing trends in the accumulation? In your second or third slide, I think you mentioned the post-2012 crisis period. Can you further elaborate on like future coordinates of the position of bourgeoisie, like, for instance, further concentration of capital, deindustrialization that started in the periphery, or the crisis of accumulation for the so-called emerging markets as well? How will all these, do you think, affect the future position of bourgeoisie? Thank you.
So, thank you. If I understand,
Apologies, Tatiana. Let's have the question by Oliver too, and then you have the final word.
Yeah, sorry, just to my question similar to Alif's and Andreas's first question, and it relates to just Polantzis, the use of Polantzis and class fractions. Obviously, he's from Europe. I'm just wondering how what does travel and what doesn't travel. I'm using Polantzis to some extent in my research on Colombia, and what I found is that this fractional argument, in my view, is just not so powerful in terms of explaining changes in Colombia, because you have big conglomerates in Colombia that are invested in various sectors, internationally orientated, nationally orientated, invested in other countries at the same time. And so this kind of reduces, in my view, the explanatory power of the fractional argument within Colombia. And I'm just wondering what you think about this, and whether you think, to what extent Polantzis' arguments travel to Latin America.
so thank you. I will start with Oliver, then I back to Elif. I think they are connected. The Polantzis traveling, it's a good question. Just to say that in Argentina and Chile, we have also Polantzis researchers. We made many meetings since 2013. I can put you in contact with them. So this idea to use the Polantzis framework is being very tested in many social formations. I think he helps us because he thought about the dependence question, and he went to Latin America, especially to Mexico, in an important conference. It's you can see that he read a lot of dependence theory, but he doesn't always have this confrontation, but he assimilated many aspects on that. I think it's, yes, we can use this, but I don't know if in Colombia, you can have a big internal bourgeoisie because you still have another kind of economy development. So we need to see, you need to go to the reality, to the concrete, and to see what kind of fraction do you have. Maybe you just have associated by a bourgeoisie and the middle capital, Colombian, that could work as internal bourgeoisie. In that, I think I go to Elif and stay with you too, but how could we see internal bourgeoisie and what will be these and so on? I think the point is not just to think about the sector, but the political ideological position. So when you have national bourgeoisie, you have an anti-imperialist position. The point of internal bourgeoisie is it's a contradictory movement. it's a pendular movement because it's still dependent, but it was the product of internationalization of production. It can be a service sector, like tourism or so on. So they depend on, when you have national, it's dependent on the national market. The accumulation is made here, so that's okay to have a rupture with imperialism force. Internal bourgeoisie, no, it's dependent, but at the same time, it's the production is this have the internal and the regional market as the preference, so it competes with external capital. Now, at the same time, as it's dependent, it depends on states' policy to protect and to guarantee the competition with foreign capital. But it can be as far as an anti-imperialist program. As all the time, they are in this position, you know. It was in many Brazilian politics, like Vargas and Lula and so on. That's why they give the working class support, and they were building this. So I think internal bourgeoisie, in terms of economy, they are part of this global chain that the multinational will be in the top, you know, or they are interested in the national or regional market. But in terms of political meanings of the political position, you will see this competition with the external capital. At the same time, this opposition could be just a conflict, punctual conflict, a selective conflict. What I saw in the neo-developmentalism period during the PT's government was they doesn't want, instead of a liberalization of the commerce and capital, they want a selective protectionism. What means the government's acquisitions to be preferred to national companies, to have what we call local production protection. The funds for the national bank. Oh, we need investment. That's a selective protectionism. It's a behavior that we could see. And other things, they want to get markets for exportation, as they doesn't want just the national market. They need a social foreign policy, as we call in Lula's government. They need Latin America, they need Africa and Asia, and so on. And also they want to have foreign direct investment, like the Brazilian enterprises that were acting in South America, territorial with the infrastructure initiatives and so on. So they have this selective protectionism, exportation, and internationalization of the big enterprises. And that's what you can see. And okay, that's a different agenda if you just want to adopt neoliberalism program. And you can read it in the documents of the association, the enterprises associations, the unions of them, and you go building your research with this. That's what we do.
Thank you, Tatiana. I think that's a good moment that brings us actually to the end of this very interesting seminar. Yeah, we had lots of discussion. I think that's always a sign of an excellent presentation. Yeah, if it causes debate and questions and comments. So thanks a lot. I thought it's also quite encouraging to see such a international gathering. Yeah, we've got a presentation from Brazil. We've got people in several parts of the UK. We've got comrades from Turkey who have linked in and listened to us. So that's very encouraging. That's in a way the future for CSSGJ. Yeah, what we are trying to do as an independent center now of the university, to have this kind of much more international events. But again, many thanks to you, Tatiana.
Oh, thank you.
Many thanks to all our contributors. And in 2 weeks' time, hopefully we see one or the other of you to our next CSSGJ seminar. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone.
All the best.
All right.
Bye.